Recyclico, making lithium-ion last forever. Recyclico's patented recycling process achieves up to 100% recovery of battery metals from lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, and aluminum. Recyclico Battery Materials Incorporated trades on the TSX Venture AMY, on the OTCQB AMYZF, and Frankfurt ID4. For more information, visit recyclico.com or phone us at 778-574-4444. Recyclico, making lithium-ion last forever.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Mark Leibovit, editor and publisher of the Leibovit VR newsletters, also known as VRTrader.com. He's speaking to us from Arizona. Mark, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be back. Sorry I wasn't in Vancouver.
Yes, we had the economic conference last weekend. You were one of the guest speakers, but before we get to what you talked about, do you still have a special offer for our listeners?
We're going to pass this week on the special offer. Maybe we'll talk about it next week, but you can go to VRTrader.com, and we have a whole slew of newsletters. Our forecast model, which we actually displayed the results and the projection at the World Outlook Conference via video last weekend, was bullseye for the year. So I would encourage you to go to VRTrader.com, go to the VR Forecaster, and get a picture of how we see 2023 unfolding. I also want to disclose that I'm not a financial advisor, nor do I provide financial advice, but we do educational research, technical research, and cyclical research on the market.
Now, Mark, you were one of the guest speakers via Zoom at the economic conference in Vancouver. What did you talk about, and did you get any feedback?
Well, we started off with a short clip from the United Nations back in 1987 when Ronald Reagan made a presentation up there. And if you go to our website, it's actually right at the top of our homepage, VRTrader.com. You can see it yourself. And basically, what Ronald Reagan said was he was sort of saying, well, we've got the Soviet Union and the U.S. and, there's obviously conflict between a potential conflict, Cold War going on. This is before the wall came down in Berlin, obviously, but, basically he said, de Tocqueville, who came to the U.S., the French, literary, couple centuries prior, I think a century prior, said, he sees, the U.S. being the country of being successful with plowshares, and the Russia would be more military. And I don't know if that's true or not, but maybe I guess we were more agricultural and we got forced into the military world, as things unfolded. But anyway, he's just comparing what's going on, but he made a very interesting statement which stands out to me, and I put it on my website. I've known it for years, and now we're going to get into the far-fetched subject, which people think that is off the wall, but it's not off the wall for me, is the subject of aliens and extraterrestrials. And this is where Ronald Reagan comes in, because in that presentation he essentially said, what if there was a force outside the planet that would somehow be powerful enough or fearful enough that would bring us together as a planet so we could ignore all the tensions that we have between ourselves and nations. And that was his United Nations presentation. And he actually makes reference to those outside the planet, which could be a force or a fear that could bring us together. So I started off the presentation with that, because there's been a lot going on, as you know, in this subject area for decades, and actually in terms of human civilization for thousands of years. And it's been coming to the forefront. Sightings all over the place. In fact, there was a sighting down by the border when Biden was down there visiting the southern border, and there's actually a picture, I think it was in the New York Post. I have that on my website. So I've been predicting for a while that we're going to get some type of, some type of false flag or some type of event that's going to shake everybody up for quite a period of time here in the last month or two. And of course, no alien ship showed up, but we got that balloon crossing the U.S. And that was sort of a false flag in a way. Got everybody really upset. And there was another one down in Argentina. And now I'm reading there's dozens or hundreds of these things that China claims sends all over the world. So it's not extraterrestrials. It's not the secret space program stuff that I talk about. But I thought it was really interesting that we did see this balloon event. And I'm still of the notion to believe that there's going to be some type of event if it serves the benefit of the government and the powers that be to somehow for them to gain more control over us. And but that's how sort of why I kicked it off, and we had a little bit of a discussion about that before we got into the markets. But I look at the world in a geocosmic, geopolitical framework. I mean, look at the destruction that we just experienced in Turkey, and with the earthquake there, and all the press and all the people that suffered because of that. And we talk about the fires on the planet. And I think there's still 43 active volcanoes on the planet. And there was an asteroid that the great scientists that we have missed. It
wasn't very big, Mark. You have to admit, they said the size of a large truck or something. And it'll be awful if it slammed into your city. It would wipe it out. But it's not a civilization ender or going to cause widespread damage.
Right,
but it still would be unpleasant to land on your lap.
Right, but I'm saying the fact that it wasn't detected, and it was an amateur astronomer that found it, and luckily it was, as you say, small. I think it was the size of an automobile or something.
Yeah.
So it was, and so I'm just saying we have all these things that we could worry about besides, the stupidity in our politicians and the manipulation of the markets and the Ukraine situation and what's going on with China right now with either balloons or fearful of war via Taiwan, and the manipulations of the Federal Reserve and the extreme nonsense in Congress between the opposing parties and the spending problem and the ability or the acceptability of having $30 trillion in debt, not worrying about it. So, I mean, there's a lot of things you can think about. So I just think that there's something else that is, in my opinion, more significant than any of these. And obviously, if there was an extraterrestrial event, that could change the planet in a big way, which is what Ronald Reagan essentially inferred to in that United Nations presentation. So anyway, that was the beginning of I went off on a tangent, but that was the sort of the highlight for me.
Yes, scientists say roughly 100 metric tons of cosmic dust enters the Earth's atmosphere every day. So some of it's bound to be more than just dust, statistically. Now,
it's also viruses. It's also viruses. I mean, they find stuff. I mean, they talk about the seeding of the planets, and a lot of the asteroids and meteors contain, fragments of, frozen bacteria or viruses that could spawn life. So, yeah, I mean, we could be here partially because of stuff that crashed into us and grew and expanded and evolved. So, they've already proven that. So, anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, and Mark, also happening now, a chunk of the sun came loose and is now twirling around the North Pole of the sun. And I'm just wondering, how will that affect our weather, our climate, our survivability, because scientists haven't observed that kind of behavior from the sun before.
Right. In fact, there's an article on the space website that I track that I think we put into the newsletter, and they're calling it, they say, this may not be the one you're talking about, but they say a big sunspot is emerging, and a new and apparently large sunspot is emerging over the sun's southeastern limb, and amateur astronomers with solar telescopes point that this could be leading to potentially a dramatic explosion on the far side of the sun. So whether that's going to happen or not. Yeah, we talked about the Carrington event and all types of, solar flares and fun things that happen. But, if you're sitting in Turkey and that earthquake hits, suddenly all the reality of what is happening economically means nothing because you're confronted with the geocosmic, which is really what I'm trying to point out. There's very little what we really have control of. And I guess if you're an individual investor, you're in the market, you really have no control of anything. I mean, whether it's geocosmic, political, or what the markets are doing, you're just a player in the game, and you have to try to swim through it and survive. And obviously, if that asteroid hits, like the one that was over Argentina, that you say was very small, and it hits you, then obviously what I'm saying is irrelevant that you're not here anymore. But
Christmas Eve, 1965, I lived in far north Alberta near the Northwest Territories border, and I saw a very bright glowing object the size of the moon go by. It was so close, 60 miles up, they say. The shadow of the trees swept across like somebody was putting a spotlight on it, and it left a white trail in the sky for minutes. And doing research a few years ago, it was the size of a mountain. It would have wiped out northern Alberta, part of the Northwest Territories, and the Yukon. So I've actually seen something that was very sizable, but it skipped. It came in at a shallow angle and skipped off the Earth's atmosphere. So check out for atmospheric objects, Christmas Eve, 1965.
Never crashed, is what you're saying.
It skipped. It skipped off the atmosphere. It came in shallow. Now, something that's within our atmosphere and we can control. What do you think is going to happen with crude oil?
Oh, well, I'm an ongoing bull with crude oil. We had a big shakeout in it, and I still think you're going to see huge prices in the next few years. 200, 300 a barrel, those type of numbers. That's sort of where my forecasts are going. I just think the lockdown, so to speak, on production and the mental illness regarding, the green planet, and everybody has to own an EV, and therefore we don't need crude oil anymore, or the production. I mean, all this is, it's going to create a huge backlog, and, it's going to result in much higher prices. I'm not saying it's going up tomorrow, though I am long in our newsletter in terms of positive comments on the crude oil and, those companies that are related. And we saw some of the big energy companies do very well. Of course, they're being criticized now because they made so much money in a time that supposedly other people are suffering as gas prices are higher. But positive earnings came in from Chevron, for example, and I think Exxon as well. So that's encouraging to me because at least keeps these companies alive. If you left it to the Democrats in charge here in the U.S., I mean, they would try to shut down oil everywhere, which would really create and lead to catastrophe everywhere. So it's a slow process. It's a nice idea to get gasoline off the highways and have everybody have an EV vehicle. But I think you're going to need crude oil forever. Because it still has byproducts that we need for production of various materials. And what about mining? What about all the rare earths and minerals, and anything from lithium to palladium to platinum to nickel, copper, all the things you need to create the EV vehicle. That creates mining. And then from the the green point of view, well, you can't have that because that could create pollution by digging up these things. And what about the tractors and all the material handling equipment that needs to extract all this stuff? So, the perfect world of an EV and no pollution of any kind, and just to produce the solar panels or the windmills, we need all this materials. Over time, there's going to be a clog in the works here, and you're going to see crude oil much higher, particularly with this short-sighted viewpoint. And not to mention, as we've talked about it, I'm being so repetitive here, I don't mean to, but, how are you going to, I can't even plug in an EV. I have a vehicle that I have, and you try to get a spot. There's no spots around. They're completely full, lines, and, there aren't enough locations. The process is slow, so you get most of these EV charging places. You pull up, it takes you 2 hours to charge up. Who wants to do that? So we have a long way to go.
Well, plug it in at home only at night when electricity rates are at their lowest. We'll have more with Mark Leibovit right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Mark Leibovit. Mark, in Vancouver last weekend, there was a conference about the ecology and safety of our oceans. Protesters were there saying we can't mine the ocean bottom because it could disturb things, life that we don't know about. Well, most of the planet is covered in ocean water. We've pretty well depleted all of the mineral resources on the surface that are easy to get to. Where are we supposed to get these minerals for their EVs and solar panels and so on if we can't mine the ocean?
You know, it's liberalism is a mental disorder. That's how I have to respond to this. And that was the title of a book by Michael Savage about 10, 11 years ago. And every time I hear these kind of ridiculous comments, I mean, sure, you know, if you have to go to places and there's going to be some disruption, you know, in the earth and so forth, you have to try to mitigate it as best you can. I mean, we don't want to hurt the wildlife, the biolife, and people, but, you know, we've learned that there's a way of reducing these things to minimize any damage. So, do you want to live or die, or you have to worry about the bottom of the ocean being stirred up? I mean, you know, there's trade-offs. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, you know, we could wait till well, I think we have it already, but we can wait to mine the asteroids and do all the damage in outer space and not do anything on our planet. You know, several articles out. NASA has already sent vehicles to some asteroids for testing for that purpose. There's an article in my newsletter about that. So we, you know, maybe, you know, there's no crude oil. Well, I'm speculating. You think there could be crude oil on some asteroid somewhere? You know, maybe there was some biolife there and you dig deep enough. Maybe there could be crude oil on an asteroid, but the ones I see mostly have gold and rare earths and other minerals and so forth. So we can wait to do that. But you're asking me a question. I mean, this is the trade-off. I mean, there's going to be perhaps some damage you try to mitigate, but if we need these things to survive, you could argue the same thing. Well, if we're going to grow food, you know, the environmentalists were complaining about cows and the emission from cow dung and how that's, you know, polluting the atmosphere and everything. So now we should kill off all our cows and not have any meat because of the pollution from the dung out there. So, I mean, you can get to, as I say, it's mental illness. I mean, you know, everything in an extreme is ridiculous to go to that point. I'm sure there's excesses somewhere and somebody's not doing the right thing to protect the environment when they do these things, but, you know, you have to have them and we have to live with that. So, I think these people need to protest about other things. They're certainly not in my category of sanity.
Well, I was just wondering how many buffalo roam the plains. Let's see, between 350,000 and 400,000 wood bison, 700. Anyway, so we have hundreds of thousands of buffalo. This is today. It's between 350,000 and 400,000. Were there not like tens of hundreds of thousands of buffalo, back before Caucasians landed in North America? Were they responsible for the climate change that took place during Roman times? Or was that just sunspots and changes in the Earth's orbit?
Absolutely. I mean, mankind wasn't around supposedly polluting the atmosphere during all the previous, geocosmic changes on our planet. I mean, we've had Earth, polar shifts. We've had continents move. We've had, the Great Flood 12,000 years ago, which we can discuss, exactly what caused that. Those recorded in cultures from all over the planet, ice ages, and, so on and on, without, the crude oil industry or the mining industry.
Yeah.
Now, I'm of the belief there was high civilization on this planet. I mean, there's already evidence of that. We're finding artifacts and type of things. So that it is there in East Indian, I guess you call it mythology, but some people think it's a characterization of what happened in ancient times, where there were flying machines and the ability to go into space.
Mark, I just looked. The Canadian Encyclopedia says in the 1800s, before the buffalo were slaughtered, there were between 30 to 60 million bison.
Right. I remember. I didn't want to correct you before, but
Yeah.
I thought there were tens of millions of these things.
Yeah,
at one
30
point.
to 60 million.
Right. I mean, and then they butchered them, for their skins and for the meat. And
Just their
everything.
tongues. They shot buffalo for just their tongues.
Unbelievable. Such beautiful animals.
So useful.
Yeah, when one of these things throws people into the air when they get too close to them, I actually applaud for the buffalo. But I remember when I was a kid, I actually got within 15 feet of one of them to take some video, not realizing how dangerous they really were and what they could really do to you in 3 seconds, because they can go really fast and they're beautiful animals. It's one of the reasons I love going into up to Montana and Yellowstone and Grand Tetons, just to see these beautiful animals. But thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, our next door neighbors on the farm up in Peace River across the road, they have buffalo, beefalo, cattle, and horses, all living together in perfect harmony.
That's as it should be.
All of us critters should get along in perfect harmony. Mark, anything else we should be keeping a close eye on right now?
Well, let's talk about, really briefly here, we've got the Vernal Equinox coming in mid-March. I mentioned this before. And many times it's coincident within a week or two of, big lows or big highs in the market. So we got to watch the political, geocosmic, technical, the whole situation, how the market unfolds here. My own personal bias, which could be wrong, is that it could be a big low in the market. We've seen this happen many times, but it could invert. So I've been watching that pretty carefully. And as a general comment, I know this is supposed to be an economic stock market, financial type broadcast. We've had a big move here, but my old friend Yale Hirsch, who created the January barometer back in 1970, had talked about the early warning system, the first 5 days of the year and the 30 days in January, and both came out positive. So nothing is 100%, but it says that 2023 should be net up, whether you have big nosedives along the way or whatever, because of the, you can call it an arcane indicator. We also have the Super Bowl indicator this weekend coming up, by the way, because there's the old theory that if the old AFC, this is of course for the U.S., followers, but, the AFC, old AFC winners come in, that's bearish for the market versus the NFC. So, it's an arcane indicator. I think it has like a 60% reliability. So, should be interesting for those who follow arcane indicators. But the January barometer has been pretty good. It's probably in the same 60-70% category for the year. But I'm looking for a lot of volatility this year in the market. And, I don't think inflation has disappeared, and I don't think the Federal Reserve is done. And I think people my basic view is that I think people got fooled a little bit that the bear market is absolutely over and everything is hunky-dory here for the rest of this year and next year. But we trade, we try to find the swings, and let's see how it pans out. But I would be a tad cautious here a little bit into next month because of historical variations about lows and highs and volatility.
Mark, thank you so much for chatting with us.
My pleasure, Jim. Always fun. Thank you.
My guest has been Mark Leibovit, editor and publisher of the Leibovit VR newsletters, also known as VRTrader.com. If you have any questions for Mark or any of our guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. We'll ask that question for you. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.